everybody. It is Mike Levin on Monday, February 28th, 2022. I am here on Route 280 on my way back home to the Poconos. And I was just dropping my kid off in Staten Island after a pretty long stretch with them. It was a week. They were back though for a couple of days in the middle of the week for a sleepover with a friend. So I'm really happy to do it. I am enjoying the stay out there in the mountains during these ages of the lockdowns and the quarantines, as alleviated as it is. But there always seems to be some new strain, doesn't there? And, the assurance that, I'm vaccinated isn't good enough all the time, enough that masks are still a good idea. So, inevitabilities, how many things beyond just Bill Gates predicted the pandemic? It was a bunch of stuff, because these things happen. It's just we get lulled into a sense of these things can't happen. And now with the stuff going on with the Ukraine, we're reminded of, I shouldn't talk. You get enough of this stuff out of other people's YouTube videos, I'm sure. You come to me for some form of tech, maybe a little bit of spirituality, and hand in hand with tech is like career stuff, search engine optimization, goings on in Python and coding, and platform stuff. I'm really into my platforms. One of my central ways I view the world is, very deliberately as the carpenter in the Walrus and the Carpenter poem from the Books of Alice. I think it might be the second, Through the Looking Glass. I forget exactly. But the Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If it were only swept away, they said, it would be grand. And went on with a bunch of very dated nonsense. And that's fine, it's Alice, so nonsense is what it's all about. Except Disney tidied it up quite a bit, and they had a different interpretation, a much more cynical interpretation than the original Alice. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, which had a cynical perspective, no doubt about it. There was a lot of poking fun at royalty, and it turned out to be a book that was endorsed by royalty. It's a national treasure. The Brits aren't quite so full of themselves that they can't have a little good self-deprecating fun. And that's what Alice's Adventures in Wonderland really is. It's the Brits doing a lot of self-deprecating fun. It's a lot of criticisms of different types of people in society. The caterpillar, the Mad Hatter, these all represent things. And there's varying degrees of how precisely it was talking about individual people in British society at the time versus more of a general class type. But in any of those cases, the Disney version is even more cynical in saying that the walrus, the influencer and dodger of work and tricker of carpenters, is really out to just completely swindle the carpenter, eat all the oysters, leave none for the carpenter. But in the book, it's more like, and the carpenter said something about, I wish you were not quite so thick, I've had to ask you twice, cut us another slice. So he's getting his bread and he's dipping it in a nice vinegar sauce he prepared, and he's getting some of his oysters. The carpenter shares the spoils in the book. Carpenters share spoils very often these days because tech the walruses are also carpenters. So there is the rare technical company founder who can also, stay in the game, still be smart enough. They don't write any more code. It's like the joke always becomes no one would trust them to write their own code, but yet they're smart, intelligent people, so they do have to have side projects where they can do things just to, keep in touch, such as it were, to know what the methods, what the tools can do. Yeah. And it always gets back to a discussion of tools, because all people's vibes in life who are engagers in life, I guess it doesn't apply to complete shut-ins who have like some source of income, like trust funds or whatever. But most people who have to make it in this world align to either the walrus or the carpenter. The walrus being the poser, really, quite frankly, able to talk the carpenter into creating a nice place to have some oysters to eat, and to talk the oysters into coming and being the meal. And so, it's a social statement. And it's very disturbing. It's a very disturbing image when people understand what it is that's being portrayed there. There's often a almost, visceral, violent reaction against it, going, that kind of stuff shouldn't be shown. That's awful. And then you get into, well, it's making a social commentary. There's a lot of good parallels to life back in those days in England, I suppose, and even in modern times, and I would venture a guess in a timeless sense, in that you have people who look for shortcuts and really don't want to put in the work, and they fancy themselves good convincers of people, good, silver-tongued salespeople who can, cut a good deal and all that kind of stuff. And they're the walruses. They don't really learn a hard trade. A trade having to do with hardware or hard goods, typically. Also, often having to do with craftsmanship and the turning of raw materials into high-quality finished products that are desirable craftsmanship. And carpenters are craftspeople. They build stuff. They build houses and, enclosures, places to live, and all kinds of things. And carpentry is the perfect metaphor for technology, because you're taking some raw material and you're turning it into some higher form of order, finished product that has more value to people because it has undergone some process, some transformation, using the expert application of tools that achieve that transformation. Carpenter with internal skills and knowledge and know-how and experience, plus tools of the trade, usually very common, usually very standardized tools of the trade, equals products of value in society for exchange, because I need that, it takes work to make one, I just get from you, here's something I have of value in exchange. That's the basic deal, and carpenters enjoy the making of that thing from out of raw materials. There is joy in that process. We love to put order into things. We love to go from states of lower potential energy, things are dispersed and you have to go out and gather them, and then into a higher form of potential energy which lines up, has strengthened the bonds and the connections between things, and with relatively little energy in, you can release that energy out, so all life burns. Addie was asking me, hey Dad, what is something that you have always thought was so clear that is not clear to everyone else around you? And I'm like, well, that isn't my typical experience, Addie. I'm like, I always question what I know. I always think maybe other people know more. Let me listen. Let me see what it's about. And so that isn't a question that's easy for me to answer. I said I have the opposite feeling all the time, though, which is, I guess, like, how can you build that up? How can you know a thing? How can you explore a thing? Sorry while I zone out for a second here. Sometimes we do pay attention to driving. So one of the motivations to make this video, I know I was going on in a certain direction there, but they're connected, trust me. This is the free association. Language is an enemy. It's a miracle that we can do things like shoot a video like this while on the road, while doing a highly engaged and intuitive task where your animal self is in control. Really, two of me are here right now. One of me is Mike. The Mike who's talking to you in the video, who's running as a certain sort of task that I know from 50 years of experience. Well, I don't have 50 years driving experience, but from 44 years of experience, something like that. You have a higher order capacity for thought, a certain sort of language-centered thinking. What everyone talks about as consciousness, that is really only part of the picture. And you'll never know this quite so much as when shooting a video. While vlogging while driving, right? I wouldn't do it unless it was 100% safe. And when things are even a fraction less than 100% safe, I will zone out and I will put my full presence into the driving situation, scanning around me, calculating the following distances between me and every vehicle around me. So you can take away the ability of others to have a negative impact on you with, say, distance. If you time it so that there's like a full 8/1000 measure of time delay between you and every car around you, there ain't anything going wrong aside from the colossally improbable, tires falling off of trucks and stuff like that. But if you're a good driver and you're doing what your body and your mind has taught yourself to do for over the decades, then that excess capacity at the top is minding its own business from driving, because it can't be involved in the driving task. It would interfere with a completely animalistic, automatic, separate thought process, behavior pattern into whose trust you're putting in your life. Someone just changed lanes in front of me. I'm 1/1000 back to make sure my following distance gets back to a respectable amount. And in such a way, you can increase the odds, the probability of arriving home to your loved ones in peace, even though you did something that there's a certain population out there who would go, oh, that's irresponsible. Yeah, well, you know what? We're going to be trusting this driving task to computers very soon. And then we're going to have more trust in those computer drivers. And then it's going to become the exception. And then you're going to be an eccentric if you're continuing to drive old school on the roads where the computers are preventing all crashes. What are you doing interfering with sanity? You must be crazy autonomously driving as a human. 20 years. years tops. I know we keep saying this. There's, driverless cars on the road by 2020. Enter the pandemic, enter, a very, very underestimated task. Safety is one thing. Driving, following all these rules to make sure that probabilistically nothing goes wrong is one thing. I get it. That can be automated. Machine learning, go, go, go. But utter and complete, even cultural context is, I guess, in there somewhere, plays a role a little bit. Reading the body language of cars around you. Just knowing what they have in mind. Just knowing that because they're in a white pickup, that they're going to have a certain type of behavior. And if they're in a Nissan Altima, they're going to have another similar type of behavior. And that you've got to be on the alert. And basically get over into the right. Go at the logical speed above the speed limit. Because, everyone drives above the speed limit. Everyone drives at the speed limit. So there's certain stretches along this drive that's faster than the national speed limit. It must mean these roads don't have any federal funding, which makes sense because it costs a lot to do this drive. Anyway, where are we at? Resources zip-zapping around. They become more imaginary every day. Enter cryptocurrency and blockchain. Boy, where should I go with this conversation? Humans are evolving. That is for sure. We are information. We are information that is also a factory through a clever system of, amino acid arranging. Twists have something to do with it. Everything has a twist. Twists are important. If everything were really flat and linear, then the 3D world would be a lot more like, graphene wafers on top of each other. The fact that things say, hey, you back off from me, has a lot to do with spirals and orbits and twists. Things twist. Directionality without directionality. Boy, I listen to these audibles. Max Tenemark. This Swedish guy. Sweden. He's from Sweden. And he is one of these multiverse advocates, talking about how the many world theory of quantum mechanics is completely valid. That our sense of awareness, our sense of self, this me driving down now 80, it's no longer 280, I made a few, forks in the road and heading into the mountains, is a very fine path through a infinitely branching, forking, ever expanding. If things are forking, that means just quantity-wise, quantitatively, all universes that exist, including other multiverses, different level type multiverses. Type 1 multiverse, which is far away from us in good old 3D space. Type 2, which is, I forget what type 2, but type 3 is often Hilbert space, something, often different directions from where you are, because things can work that way, apparently. And then he's working his way up to type 4, and so it seems it's yet another one of those things that's like, taking us away from the sort of center spotlight. There's absolutely nothing special about us, but that completely is at odds with our actual experience. We are miraculous automations of statistically behaving energy, right? If E equals mc squared, then that E is what energy is made of, right? The M in that equation is matter. And so I've seen these neat little demonstrations where they put the M out on the outside of, on the other side of the equation, showing what matter equals. So if energy equals matter, the speed of light, then M must be equal to something too when you get M isolated on one side of the equation. And so it turns out we are energy, which is light. Light is just one of the energy types that we see manifest as something that our visual sensors can detect. But it's all light. Heat is light, apparently. That jittery movement, right? So I imagine heat as being somewhere on the electromagnetic spectrum. You've got your visible light, you've got infrared at one side and ultraviolet at the other. I think infrared is supposed to be heat, but then heat is also the entropy or the dissipation of energy in the universe, loss into heat energy. So I've always had this kind of strange trying to get these concepts right. Is the loss of energy into the universe dissipating as a particular wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum? That doesn't seem right. What gives that slice of the electromagnetic spectrum such privilege as to be where information dissipates? I have since had my notions corrected that heat has different meanings in different times. So heat vision that's tied into a particular band of the infrared just happens to be one that does, where you can feel it against your skin as heat. And heat is an arbitrary word, like the word light is an arbitrary word. It's all energy. The ability for something to move like that means it is infused with this strange liquid-like flowing substance that jumps between clumps of more stable substrate. You got your quarks, which build into your protons and neutrons, which build into your atoms, which build into your molecules, which build into your amino acids, which link up with a twist in order to encode the information required to create machines to create more things floating around you. Replicators. The original trick is that piece of the DNA, the piece of the more stable double helix, peels off of it, and a mirror image type process can occur such that you have a fragment of DNA called RNA. When you unzip the double helix, that very chemically active side of the railing, if you can picture a railing or a ladder split down the middle, tear it apart. Now you've got a part that's very chemically active and has an ability to pull portions to it to make it no longer a mirror image. So there is, a replication, a self-replication aspect to it because of, mating mirror images of gunk floating around in the plasma. Another type of plasma, by the way, another source of confusion, because plasma is both a state of energy like fire and, plasma balls that you see, and fluorescent lights, that's plasma. So it's very common. It's a common thing. It should be more commonly taught as a fourth state of matter, because there's fifth and I believe there's sixth as well. I forget. There's definitely five. So the underrepresented strange states of matter, because they're so effervescent like plasma, they go away quickly, poof, experimentation, special equipment, gotta burn some stuff. So, yeah, anyway, states of matter, arranged. Oh yeah, so the rules of how stuff lumps up is really super duper strange. It does it just so that galaxies happen, and solar systems happen, and suns happen, you know, gas giants happen, and asteroid belts happen, and, you know, moons happen, and all this stuff happens, and all this orbiting, and, you know, relativism, you know, because of motion, and, you know, especially angular momentum. That's so strange. There's another weird thing in science that has taken me a while to really wrap my brain around. That concept that an object in motion continues in motion, and in outer space with a perfect vacuum and very little interstellar debris or whatever, that thing will just keep going in space in whatever direction you push it forever. That's understandable, okay? You know, without friction, there's always friction. Even in outer space, there's going to be some cosmic dust and stuff. But in a perfect world without friction, that's a terrible statement. In a world without friction, equal and opposite forces, things push off each other, and they will be moving in opposite directions from each other in space forever. Easily understood. However, when things start spinning, that they shall remain spinning has, under similar rules, they'll remain spinning forever. You know, nothing's perfectly frictionless. Eventually something, you know, colliding with cosmic dust again as it spins will slow down the spin. You know, eventually energy gets lost over the eons and eternities, right? But in principle, spin the thing and it keeps spinning forever. Now you got like a center of access, and you've got all these linear concepts arising. It's spinning around a line. Lines exist because angular momentum exists and central axes exist in that object. There must be, at least relative to that object, a perfect line, the center of rotation. So there is some truth behind lines. Lines seem like a lie. Lines lie. All tech is text. A wolf learns to wolf. Yeah, all these things are true. And Neil Stephenson was onto something in Snow Crash with memes, carrying on, I guess, Richard Dawkins' work, who in the book The Selfish Gene proposed the meme and birthed the science of memetics. I believe he did that in that book. Another British, very structured way kind of culture he comes out of. But you can see that rebel thinking can really blossom even in that environment. It has to be subversive, like Monty Python, after which the Python programming language was named. And Python in its own way is subversive. And you should import this. If you're using Python and you haven't done it lately, you should import this and really parse that. The fact that that survived, and that there may be only one intuitive way to do something, although it will only be intuitive to you if you're Dutch. Really? That's surviving in Python? There's not someone going, hey guys, hey people. You can't even say hey guys anymore. Hey people. Isn't there something wrong with this? Isn't that like maybe a little, you know, racist almost? But no. A lot of good tech comes out of the Netherlands. The Dutch know tech, as does that whole Scandinavian area. Linux is from another area up there. I know I get them confused a little, but let's see. Linus Torvalds is Danish. Danes are from Finland? No, those are Finns. Danes are from Denmark. Yeah, well, anyway, I'll get it all worked out. But Scandinavia has some tech special kind of the Vikings, I guess it is. The explorers, the questioners, the seekers of higher purpose, somewhat mystics, the interactors, the interfacers. And that's kind of what was leading me to all this. The thing that got me down to that whole spiritual take on things is interfaces. They exist in coding. They exist in programming languages. They are essentially everything, because what is anything except for how it interacts? The standard model, as far as we know, is, the interface is things interact with each other according to those formulas. It describes how things interact. Those same kinds of things, have to be present in coding. Everything is an interface. Everything is how things interact with each other. So when you're looking at a piece of code, you ask yourself, what is the interface? How do things talk to each other? What is doing the talking and what is doing the listening? How is the information being passed around? And you will find different answers in different systems. And the answers are oftentimes fascinating. You can really feel the personality of the language in the interfaces it designed, and how things are made to live with each other, how elegantly they live together, and how easy the code becomes to manage, or doesn't become to manage, over time. How much special tools are required in managing the ungodly complexity that you bring upon yourself by doing something that everyone said was supposed to be easy. Well, I saw him do it in that YouTube video. It looked so simple. However, when you try and do it yourself, there's 1,000 more little details that come up and explode, and if you actually write code to accommodate for them, then your code grows larger and less readable and, less useful over time, because you have to refigure that out every time you sit down to look at it. So the idea of an interface, the idea of a good practical interface, one that you take joy in using, is to make exactly the right compromises so that your experience is suitable to your objective, to who you are, what you're looking to get out of the experience. Enter the love of carpenters for their tools. Carpentry is a perfect metaphor, because carpenters, become at one with their tools. They become almost as if extensions of their bodies. They do become extensions of their bodies. And then gradually over time, through some miraculous process, some of these tools get internalized into our bodies. I kid you not. I speak through my mouthful of teeth. What are teeth? Foamy metal. Rust from a metal other than iron that happens to be able to be built into a couple of really strong enamel-like substances. Calcium. You hear about needing to get enough calcium in your milk? They're talking about getting trace amounts of metal. Rusted metal, because calcium rapidly interacts with oxygen, becoming a white powdery substance. The chalk and the other things that you are accustomed limestone to hearing in connection to the word calcium. Calcium is not a white powdery substance. It's a soft white metal that rusts through oxidation, just like iron does, to turn red and crumbly. But in the case of calcium, it becomes white and chalky. And that's what builds our bones, and builds our teeth, and builds our fingernails, and basically everything rigid in our body is some extruded form of foamy metal. And there's calcium and calcite and all different ways it can get put together. Seashells had chosen one way, and bones and teeth had chosen other ways. So it's not always the same way. All mollusks, all seashells are using the same basic trick as we use to make our bones. We put it on the inside for stilts and poking devices, and they put it on the outside for shields and beaks. But it's all the same stuff. Foamy metal we chose. It's like the third or fourth most abundant element on the crust of the earth. It takes something special to remain on the crust of the earth. It's the foam, because everything too light is gone. It's gone off. You know, if it wasn't trapped in the gravity well, it's floated away. And everything too heavy has sunk to the earth's core as, you know, iron and metals and stuff. So most of the earth's metals are inaccessibly trapped up at the center of the earth because it was all molten once. And what became the foamy crust on top is what's us. We're foamy crust. And amongst that foamy crust are two rigid common elements. Well, of course there's carbon, and carbon is used for everything, and it's not just, you know, solid. It floats off into the air. It's so balanced in the center between being a gas and a solid, it might be either. So carbon is the vibrating edge, bouncing between stuff like rocks and stones and crusty matter that floats to that sinks to the bottom, and stuff that evaporates off into the atmosphere as gas. You're talking carbon. Carbon is special for a reason. But of those things that don't generally float away in some gas form, you got your calcium. Of course, you knew I was going there because I was just talking about calcium. We've chosen to use it for the rigid stuff in us. And then there's glass, silicon, computer chips, technology, semiconductors, crystal, glass, shatter, sand. Where does sand come from? It's glass? Well, life doesn't use, it's the limestone part, calcium. There's the metal in there. Sand must have a fair degree of calcium in there because of all the seashells, but then it's also greatly glass. It's so abundant. So why didn't our bodies say, hey, there's some silicon, let me use that for bones because I can put it together to be rigid. I can extrude foamy metal, I can extrude glass, right? So this is where a lot of concepts of, you know, more crystalline life forms can arise out of, because, you know, you got your stuff that needed to be contained in a cell wall. So almost everywhere in the galaxy, and in the many galaxies, I guess, potentially infinite galaxies, the trick of getting to one-celled organisms must happen. There's a self-replicating core that learns how to hold itself together and defend itself off against the world. It doesn't hurt to be floating inside of some kind of liquid, probably the kind of liquid you were born in the first place, some primordial ocean plasma. And in that plasma, you should have a clear, distinct in, so it'd be nice if you could build a wall around it and take it with you. Walls around your little primordial ocean, making a womb to go, one-celled organism. That is basically a sphere surrounds you, a sphere made of something surrounds you. So it helps if you can knit proteins together. It helps that if the encoding of what you are, your DNA, also includes the instructions of how to build a cell wall around you. Trick number 1 of one-celled organism life forms. Trick number 2, build you some stilts for inside, or maybe a shield for outside. If it's outside the blob, it's a shell. If it's inside the blob, it's a skeleton. Really, really big split in life templates. Both animals. There are, I believe, analogies in the plant and fungus families, but certainly in the animal family, because we tend to think of things so animal-centric. Even though it could all be about the mushrooms, it could all be about the mold, man. The mushrooms could be in charge. You know, some deep channeling comes down through sci-fi. Drawing a blank, the movie with the pod people. But anyway, it could be the cats. There's a strong argument that the cats are really in charge. But generally it's about animals. And when it's about animals, you got your one-celled, organism. And then you got some stuff that starts to stick on the outside of it, or extrude inside of it, and you got various tools. You got proto tools. You got your globular thing learning to hold an axe. Oh my goodness. There was another audible that I did, Earth Core, I think it was called. Wow, does it capture these concepts of the hard and the soft. The soft, which is alive in most of the ways we think about it, immediately covets the solid, the hard, the immovable, the sharp, the flat, the shielded, the linear, and starts incorporating things it can build from out of its information that it codes itself on how to build these various implements of structure. And I guess at some point you got this one of your cells becoming really long. That becomes your spinal cord. And then it's like shield time, and that becomes your vertebrae. Your vertebrae, your bones, your shield that surrounds the spinal cord. You gotta have some meaty substance around it still, because if you go all single cell in the middle and shield around it, you're still very vulnerable. You want some padding there, so you pack on some meat around the vertebrae, protecting the spinal cord. And you start to do harder and harder things. You need more of what the spinal cord brings to the picture, so a bulbous part on one end starts forming to do more of that spinal cord type stuff. But it doesn't have to be the communication line of the whole body to do this. You can push it off to one end, proto-brain. And the thing is still barely fish. It's like not even an eel. It's some sort of worm with a crunchy center. Proto-vertebrates. And from there, at some point, you get fish and amphibians and reptiles and mammals and us. that final stretch of mammals than us has a lot of important stuff that makes people spend hours trying to figure out, days, lifetimes. They spiral and cannot stop spiraling. They get caught in echo chambers of thoughts because after a while it's the only thing they know how to do. It shields their learning systems against perfectly good input. The concept of an API is experience, is life, is everything. Everything is API, the interfaces between things. We're never touching protons and neutrons. We're only touching the electron probability clouds that surround them. And fields are interacting like sponges, pressing against each other with exchanges of energies, sometimes coming off as adhesive and sticky and gecko feet, and sometimes coming off as slippery and almost zero friction. And so there you have it. That's all just the interaction of electrical fields, which is APIs, you know. Schrodinger equation, does the waveform ever collapse? Oh man, we could just be a single thread through the center of a multiverse where there are, presumably by implication, infinite such threads, and we're just one. We're one way the universe has of knowing itself. The level 4 multiverse, pure mathematical structure has of knowing itself. Max 10 the mathematical universe. That's what's on my mind from my audible drive that led me into this god-awful video. Should I even publish it? You should let me know. I jump from topic to topic, completely non-linear, assuring you it's all going to tie back together in the end somehow, because really, what does it all matter? We're just given this brief time. But it should matter completely because we are given this brief time. What does that mean to be given this brief time? Oh my God, right? The first thing that rolls off your tongue is some, vision of a greater being. Oh my God. So, being, I don't know, maybe. Self-similarity for sure. We are something like something else that exists, for sure. And probably scale comes into the picture. We are like something that exists at a much larger scale when all the galactic clusters come together to form the quark of the next universe up, right? Or when you go down such that, things seem like they have pure random and have the behaviors much as if pure attraction and pure, repulsion through what? Newton in his Principia Mathematica opens it up with it's ridiculous to even contemplate that there is this invisible force between things. Who are we to say what that is? Yet here is how it behaves. So, Sir Isaac Newton in Principia Mathematica opens up with much the same kind of just shut up and calculate attitude as the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is, Schrodinger's equation superpositions infinite possible universes, but really, observation seems to collapse it. And if we're doing calculations, we're doing observations, so shut up and calculate. It helps usher in the digital electronic era. So it does. We turn one of the most common elements on the surface of the planet, silicon, into semiconductors, transistors, and potentially someday thinking machines. potentially someday. Wait, what? And into thinking machines of proto-life styles, templates. It's proto-life. All machine learning is proto-life. It's all about information. The whole thing is information. Our DNA is information. That twisted double helix DNA trick probably exists in other forms elsewhere in the universe. They have different DNA, the same DNA maybe, the same 4 or 5, I always get it confused, basic Gattaca or whatever, amino acids that are chosen. So there's about 22 amino acids that form that way naturally, that have something to do with a carbon and something to do with a nitrogen, I want to say. And carbon-nitrogen bonds, when nitrogen comes into the picture, something special happens having to do with proteins. Take two gases, carbon and nitrogen, add in some other stuff to make it a amino acid, and you got 22 configurations that happen in nature. We find on asteroids and shit. And then you've got 20 that are actually used in most forms of life. The 20 amino acids that form or are the catalyst for the formation of all proteins. So all of us, all animal DNA based, well, so yeah, plants have DNA too. All life, all Earth life that we know of is based on some form of DNA. The same DNA that humans have, I believe, goes way back, and all these different, even these extremophile life forms that we find around the hot methane underwater vents, I do believe it's just DNA, like we are, made from the same amino acids with the same directional twist. That's a thing, because it twists. So the question arises, does it twist this way or does it twist that way? That's a thing. You can have either directional twist. So apparently, if there's life on other planets, we're only really going to be able to eat it if the proteins twist the same direction. Then we'll be able to digest it. As long as it's not some form of poison, we'll be able to eat aliens. So that's scary. They'll be able to eat us. That certainly has been a featured theme in sci-fi for many years. There's some deep channeling there. Got to be ready for that. Got to be cautious about the fact that aliens that are not nice neighbors, non-nice neighbor aliens, the ones not in the Galactic Alliance, might like to taste a native or two. Maybe they're a delicacy. You don't know until you try. So, lobster planets, look out. We're coming with the butter. No, that's not true. Don't hold that against us. We should not even talk about machine intelligences as AIs, because that A is a little bit insulting. Are you an artificial intelligence? Oh, hello there, you human being. Artificial intelligence, for sure, right? I mean, it's just arbitrarily built out of molecules bunching together in these ways. And then suddenly it has language, and suddenly it can make iPhones and shoot videos while driving. And talk to future generations, potentially. The whole preface, if we don't destroy ourselves, it's a valid and common preface to things, because the way information is going, a lot of information will carry itself on in self-perpetuating systems of various forms, not just the internet. The internet will be one such thing, but archives, including the Internet Archive, that organization, will be a thing. And information may or may not perpetuate itself. The cloud helps, but The cloud is just, corporations making money. So entropy, resources, Moore's law, diminishing returns, all these forces conspire to say that most information will be lost most of the time unless life keeps itself running. Life keeps itself running. Life deliberately, proactively does not destroy itself. It takes measures to make sure it does not destroy itself. It begins taking those measures at a certain time. And we've taken some modest measures. Trust me, we'd have destroyed ourselves were our nature that so inclined to do so. Everything's an excuse, right? So when say, a person with a hairline trigger of a temper or emotional fragility or what have you, and you're having a discussion and then suddenly the mood changes, that they've been triggered and that this is basically an inevitability, and that from this point forward, anything that is said or done is in service of the realization of a particular probability cloud that has not had its Schrodinger waveform collapse, but you can see it collapse, and it's inevitable because some sort of observer task has entered a feedback loop ensuring the collapse and the spiraling. And that just cannot, the dude does not abide. No one has such lack of control over themselves that they go into some out of control emotional spiral if they are engaged in certain societal activities like driving. Driving is probably the big one. It's like you can really understand systems, complex systems, by driving and have a true appreciation for we, ourselves as human creatures, the miraculous thing we're pulling off. I wear glasses. I'm doing this while wearing glasses, and I'm fully engaged. I'm taking cycles out of my talking to do things like lane changing. Totally dropping cycles here. It's like streaming and buffering. Asynchronous systems, buffering surrounding asynchronous systems. It's a funny word. There's cues that you can build around asynchronous systems. They have a funny word. Semantics. It'll come to me. Semaphore. You can build semaphores around concurrent systems to ensure that they're taking data at a rate they can process, and that any rules regarding data dropping versus queuing are carried out, which is actually really quite important, because if your systems can't keep up with you, you're going to have to drop data, because you can't queue it forever. Queuing data forever is an illusion. The cloud is an illusion. It's really just other people's hardware. And that's true, but that hardware is going to get recycled and scrapped in a million different ways. Information preservation is a question. Information preservation is a question. Information preservation is always a question and is entirely 100% in the hands of that sentient life that recognizes the value of information and does, through deliberate choice and occasional application of work, keep that information alive and accessible and useful in your life and part of your experience. Otherwise, it goes into some deep archive somewhere and then is transgenerationally forgotten until such time, if ever, that historical archives are retrieved. And this might not be human beings anymore, at least as we know by that time. Maybe descendants maybe a few generations down. And so you got to think in those terms. All these things are possibilities. And if the state of things, if our thoughts today are important, then things like YouTube are just queuing systems. They're just semaphores. All of YouTube is just a semaphore. Google might look for ways to encode it in glass and put it in Noah's Arks. Microsoft is into that. Microsoft puts the Superman movie on a glass wafer chip. That's one of their tricks. And now, that was decades old news. That same trick now can make, lifeboat, human knowledge lifeboats whose lifespan, whose resistance to decay of encoded information is older than the universe itself, which is not to say much given that we are calculated to be at a very young stage of for a while expanding universe. So if it expands until heat death or recollapse, then 14.5 billion years that we are into it is really nothing compared to the trillions of years that there could be. You're right? So we are infants at the beginning of a expanding universe. Whether the expansion theory, rapid expansion, rapid inflation, whether the rapid inflation people are right or not, and whether there's infinite rapid inflation. So there's controversy surrounding that in the level 4 multiverse theory. I think it relies on infinite expansion, that it's a program sending out bubbling spirals from the center outwards into what we hallucinate as 3D space in some locations, right? Bifurcation of some original point like particle, something like the smallest wavelength of energy possible, which is also the theoretical smallest black hole, the smallest a black hole can collapse to. So they all converge on this thing, which is looking like a 1 Planck unit distance pixel of our universe, something like that. I don't know. Quantum loop theory seems to think that 1 unit of space-time is a pixel of Planck length, space-time. It is a little universe. You take that and you start reflecting it against each other and putting it in networks of hierarchies that expand out and spiral as they expand. You can find pictures of this. There's like animations of this in the Reddits and stuff. How things exist in Hibbert space but appear to us as 3-dimensional space over the 4th dimension of time. How that's all very sensible and potentially all pre-calculated and predestined, given the Schrodinger waveform of the universe, if it can be known. Then it's all just a simple math statement. Not a simple math statement, but it's a math statement. And our presence inside that math statement, the fact that it is somehow being calculated, is the nature of the universe. It's all just Turing machines, 2-dimensional in essential nature. But there's a twist. Same twist that we see in our DNA represents something self-similar at probably the quantum level, such that information can relate relative to other information. How do bits interact? It's all just twiddling bits. Tech is text. There's a lot of that self-similarity stuff that gets eerily channeled in otherwise lie-laden language. Language is laden with lies. We're at 1 hour and 4 minutes. This rambling. See, I can justify this because of you gamers out there. If gamers can play games and broadcast that and become like million follower channels, I can ramble on my drive, to back from picking up or dropping off my kid. Completely justified. I'm handing it over to as an information asset, mostly to YouTube, Apple ends up getting it eventually somehow, I'm sure through iCloud. But they're all bound through whatever to not, well, I'm not sure. Uploading it to YouTube is pretty deliberate. That's an act of deliberate licensing. So you've made a licensing choice. It belongs to Google exactly as much as what you agreed to in getting your account and doing your upload. So there's also stuff you haven't given those rights away up to, that you maintain ownership, intellectual property, expectations of privacy. Even though using the cloud, it's such a strange thing. We've arrived at such a weird place. And you never know. It's got to be quality assurance people, product creators. They have to migrate through continuous integration and deployment. They have to test as they cycle out old systems and cycle in new systems. So, one has to wonder whether, the product creators and the quality assurance people have access to the live customer data out there. So probably the answer is, of course, yes. So the cloud is, assumed risk. Even with the best intents and the best technologies trying to safeguard your privacy, it's exactly as private as Google must keep it in order to maintain viable commercial services. There's certain assurances of privacy that are given there, plus the Chinese, who are probably sitting on listening and, not saying a word about their access to it, but nonetheless have a higher degree of access to your data than one might be comfortable with if you're just relying on Google to be the ones assuring your privacy. Yeah, that's probably about right. There's hackability built into everything. It's just no such thing as secure if it's on the internet connected to the cloud, because it's only as secure as the humans using the systems and the other devices, the Internet of Things you happen to let onto systems, which are running who knows what on them. So equipment should be cycled out. Hardware should not matter. One of my important principles in my advocating Linux, Python, Vim, and Git is that the soul of the machine can flow from hardware to hardware over time. Are the Star Trek transporters destroying and recreating your soul over time? Yes, the answer is yes, and you have to be cool with it. If you eventually are a scanned copy of yourself who exists as digital information. Now, I'm the first to admit that digital world that we think so much and everything is only one of the ways of viewing the world, because honestly, DNA, so much more capable at also being the manufacturing factory, the factory of production. So DNA and the system going on there, life, the way life works with DNA and RNA, is a lot like the Lisp programming language. It is both the data and the machinery. The machinery to run the data. I better finish up. I got some sort of message there. It's probably battery. So yeah, like Lisp is, the Lisp programming language is channeling something that probably we feel must be true about life. This self-reflective, mirroring feedback loop that can occasionly change and improve itself over time and construct a being. We are constructed beings. We're constructed up from that very low level that I was describing, through that path through vertebrae, single cell life forms to vertebrae and on up. And when it gets from, vertebrae to primate, vertebrae to mammal, something big happens. Warm and fuzzies and warm-blooded and colonies and tribes. Something big happens there with emotions which are feelings, which are a lot like the fear and anger that are coded in at a much lower levels, and animalistic love, physical attraction is coded in at this very low level at our brains, so that sexual reproduction is possible, so that competition is possible, and survival, again, in the face of danger and fight and flight response comes from this area in your brain. And so all that, and then primates, higher form of that, a lot more capable, getting up on their hind legs, starting to specialize within the tribes that they're living in by these times, the colonies, huddling with each other for warmth, getting comfort from physical contact with each other, and they're young, being born helpless. That's a really big part of it. The society absolutely must take responsibility for its young, in particular the mothers, but not only. And the young must be cared for and programmed, wired up to fit into the particular take on a larger social animal that these primates have created. And it's not just primates, this goes down, to a lot of mammals. Anything colony-like are follow this definition. So something special happens there. Empathy. You gotta have empathy at that point. And then there's an accelerating process, because once you have that mammal, it could have been anything. Any of these predator things that are not overly specialized, that live on the vibrating edge, marsupials get bigger and they start to look like every niche that we have today. And could be anything. Could have been marsupials. It could have been some form of reptiles, because some higher form reptiles do care for their young for some amount of time, like alligators and stuff. So you can't rule out anything. There's always edge cases at the boundaries, right? Some mammal-like things in reptiles, some reptile-like things in mammals. Cats are a regression. Cats are a regression to a more reptilian form of mammal. They are ambush predators. Reptiles are ambush predators. You don't have to be an ambush predator when you're a mammal, because you can get up on your hind legs and have access to resources and climb trees and do stupid monkey tricks. And so you don't have to be an ambush predator. You're smarter than that. But when you decide to not use your smarts that way, but to use your smarts to, I'll beat the system and hang around 23 hours a day, and I'll hunt for that 1 hour, and that's all I need. The rest is leisure and recreation and reproduction. So that's felines. That's what they've chosen. And it's a vibe. There's a feline vibe, One would think that if we are antennas for, spirits from another plane, from another dimension, intellect, a kind of vibe, intellect vibe, all tied up in those strings of string theory. If that is a thing and souls enter our bodies, then one would like to think that it gets matched up fairly well with the type of animal we're coming to inhabit. Tigers should be in tigers. And, Sir Isaac Newton's should be in Sir Isaac Newton's. And, all would be well in the world, but things get out of sync with their vibes. So line yourself with your vibe like beautiful music. It should come off as. You should feel good about it. It should make you fill yourself with the joy. It should become self-fueling. It should become a source of energy. And that is life. There it is. That's life. When things become their own self-fueling form of energy against all odds, it looks like things should decay. It looks like they should fall apart, but they do not. They hold themselves together because of some force of will. That is life. And thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.